All right, I thought I would talk about what being a warrior is about. But I first I want to make it clear that a warrior is not someone that is peaceful all the time. A warrior is not a pacifist. Now, I know that might sound stupid, but a warrior that never fights physically is like a pacifist that never avoids a fight. It doesn't make any sense. A war fighter that never fights a war is like a VeggieTales pirate that doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like literally in the name that they do the thing that the person confusing the issue says the opposite of. It's utterly moronic. It's stupid as hell. It's stolen valor. They want to have the um, validation of being a warrior while not having the qualifications of a warrior. It's the wokeness of warriors, basically. It's the woke version of warriors. And you'll notice that the Democrats and the socialists and the progressives always use this terminology, but they're actually cowards when it comes to a real fight. Um, so that's my complaint, and I stick by it, and I'm not going to change my mind because the thing that differentiates a warrior from everyone else, and I'm not saying, and I'll develop into this a little bit, so don't take this to mean that they have to do it all the time, but the one thing a warrior is capable of doing precisely that the others are more lacking on, as a specialization at least, is a warrior cuts away tumors to the human race. And I was watching Pilgrim's Pass on the manga Vagabond, and he was bringing up this point that a warrior specifically is someone that cuts away parasites from the human race. And he's not talking about parasites like welfare recipients or something like that. He's talking about people that are exceedingly greedy and selfish and destructive and violent psychopathically. It's not someone necessarily who does something really bad, even, or a lot of pretty bad things. Because, and this gets into the next stage of my suggestion or video, which is a warrior, if he's to serve society well, typically learns eventually to talk things down and calm people down and bluff when possible and fight when necessary. So violence is a last resort, but it's never off the table for a warrior. It's backed up by the threat of force at all times. And you have to be capable of enacting that force. It can't just be a pure bluff for you to be a warrior. Basically, I mean, there's an exception of like that one guy who was outnumbered by like 1,000 to 1 with like 150 soldiers in the city versus 100,000 soldiers coming down the road, and all he did was sit on a gate and start playing a glorified banjo in China. And like, okay, in one situation where you're literally outnumbered 1,000 to 1, you know, you can still be a warrior and bluff your way without the ability to back it up. But like, generally speaking, if you had an equal sized army, you could back it up with force because you're a tactician or a strategist or something like that. And Miyamoto Musashi uses the term strategist to describe sword fighters. So there's a interplay between the big group and the medium group and the small group and the individual and their relation in conflict and so on. Also, it should be noted that Ares is the god of justice in Greece, ancient Greece. And I was like, okay, if Ares is the god of like just bloodshed and stuff like that, why is he worshipped? Why do people care what he thinks? You know, why wouldn't they just like throw him out? And then years later, I learned Ares is the god of justice. And that's the duality of the ability to hurt someone and using it to hurt people who really hurt others when there's no other way to stop them, basically. And that's a duality of the warrior, basically. It's the ability to hurt others, and for you to be a good warrior or a great warrior, it's the ability to know when to use the ability to hurt people so that you hurt those who really hurt others and there's no other way of stopping them from hurting other people. And this develops into the next stage of this video, which is Pilgrim's Past was pointing out that you use your words and you try and calm things down and talk things over and maybe do a bit of a bluff and so on. But at some point, you need to know how to back it up with violence if necessary. So this isn't necessarily Heinlein's worship of violence as the supreme factor in resolving differences. This is an emphasis on peaceful negotiations and so on. But a warrior is basically a combination of Jedi and Sith, in a way. They're more Jedi-like for the most part as they grow older, but they start off as Sith lords and apprentices at first. And the reason why there's a need for Jedi is because there are Sith. And some people don't grow out of the Sith mentality, and you need the Jedi to counter them. And by the way, that is a specific Eastern Oriental... George Lucas borrowed Jedi, Bushido, and Sith bandits basically from Japan. So it's like a direct correlation between the two. And this is in the context of Miyamoto Musashi. But there's a one of the things that people learn over the years as they grow wiser and possibly keep their warrior, warfighter, combative capabilities, and so on, is that there's a slight trajectory of like a brute or someone who's just violent for their own ego's sake or something, and then they have a moment where they crash out, and then they become pacifistic for a while, or at least a lot more peaceful by a long shot, and then they learn to take up the sword again, or the ability to fight again really well, with a new Knight of God, holy warrior, sword saint kind of way of life, serving life by excising tumors instead of being a berserker. And that's a general path people take consistently, kind of like the going along, crashing in life, and then finding God, and then rising again to new heights that you didn't match, that your previous life before the crash couldn't match. Now, I'm not saying it's always like that, but that is a consistent sort of medium-low, very high, medium-low, high development path in your situation and world and experience and so on. So, yeah. You know, but the hippies literally cannot wrap their head around the idea that a warrior fights wars. They couldn't wrap their head around that. So again, the leftists, the sheep, the civilians are idiots, basically, when it comes to fighting. It's a technical skill, but it's also the emphasis on it is also balanced by a way of life approach. And what Pilgrim's Past was saying is that priests who deal with the effects of death in a passive manner educate warriors who deal with the effects of death in an active manner. And the priest civilizes the warrior, and the woman who becomes a mother civilizes the warrior. There are two different paths to take to civilize warriors, or people who are physically, mentally, and so on inclined towards fighting, to maximize the benefit of someone who's capable of violence against those who are parasitically bullies and so on. And by bullies, I mean absolute wrecking balls for the rest of humanity and so on. Now, I mentioned that a lot of civilian sort of stuff is very stolen valorish and sort of like a spiritual path people, and hippies are very like pacifist while wanting to be declared warriors, and I get that that's a real problem, like I mentioned. But the warrior language of the spiritual path does have a little bit of merit regardless, especially when you're facing death, basically. It's because that's one of the key components of a warrior is the resolute acceptance of death and so on. But the farmer knows that through the seasons of winter and so on. The merchant knows it through bad trade deals gone bad. The skilled carpenter or artisan or artist knows it through the decline of his skills, or maybe, I don't know. I don't know about the artisan or the skilled tradesman. But the priest knows it because he deals with funerals all the time and so on. So each one has a... And the warrior, of course, knows it because he's making it happen to other people and has it happen to him possibly too, so he has to accept it that way. So it's a little more interpersonal or personal relation to death than the other 3 or 4 paths in society and so on. And it's a technical skill because you have to know the technical aspects of your weapons as tools for war, and your armor as tools for war, and logistics, and human organization, and the principle of concentration of force and mobility and combined arms and so on, and countering specific different weapon types with your own weapon type and so on. But the philosophical way of life thing balances the technical, materialist, almost postmodern scientific focus with the spiritual, enchanted, holistic, divine, and numinous aspects of life. And that's for a warrior specifically. Now, I can't speak to farmers or merchants or skilled tradesmen because I don't know anything about those things, basically, myself. But my capacity to wreck someone's jaw and the fact that I've faced death quite a few times, and I've encountered corpses and smelled dead corpses that are a week old in the middle of summer rotting, and the fact that people keep dropping like flies in my area, and that I'm not afraid to take upon 4 or 5 people in a fist fight, and I'm capable of taking down 3 at least within 2 minutes at most, and I can take down 2 people as well, obviously, says that I'm a warrior even though I've never been in an actual war. But I've individually individual situations, experienced the aspects of a veteran and so on. And I know that we all face death a little bit, and we all experience people dying in our lives or something, and we're all going to die eventually and so on. But what I'm saying is that I've experienced it a little more intensely than average, and I've faced my own death for honor's sake and restoring honor and redemption and so on. The final thing I will say is that Pilgrim's Pass is correct, that a great warrior will use his words first, and that's part of the Jedi thing. Will use his words first to try and talk down the violent person into not being a psychopath anymore, or something like that. But at the end, if he can't convince the person not to be a psychopath and a parasite that drains the resources of someone else until they die, if you can't convince them, if you can't threaten them, and then you have to beat the crap out of them until they stop doing it by Pavlovian conditioning, basically. And ultimately, if they can't be Pavlovian conditioned, you might have to kill them. A good example of a parasite would be Johnny Somali. Yeah. But also, prison exists for a reason, and that's part of the attempt to redeem people and reach out to them and so on. And there are actually a lot of stories about people who've been punished for wrongdoing who are redeemed at the end and become much better people. And I understand that principle because I've lived it personally as the bad person or sort of shitty person who became way better than before. So it's not all about I'm the toughest, I'm the most violent person. In the end, once you become skilled enough and wise enough as a true warrior, but there is a capacity to violence that you absolutely need physically in order to be a proper warrior. Fighting with your words and being witty online is not being a warrior.